Welcome to Great for the Brain Oceania and VO Life. It's the interview series which goes behind the scenes of the voiceover industry and associated crafts and find out a little bit more and get a chance to geek out a little bit in the world of voice. And joining me today is a total nerd of audio, a kindred spirit of mine. It's Chris Nicholl from Wizz FX. Welcome, Chris.
Mm-hmm. Hello, thank you for having me.
That's quite all right. You're a Kiwi expat. You're living in London. Not London anymore. You were in London, right?
I was, yeah.
And now you're...
I'm in the southwest of England, a shire called Devonshire.
I love it. I feel like we're at the cusp of doing a series of Kiwis doing good things in audio overseas. So you're the first. There you go. Welcome.
Oh, cool. Yeah. Oh, that's you can get. I'm probably the lowest point to start. I'm sure there are people doing much better than me.
We've got to give ourselves somewhere to go.
Yeah. That's
right. Now we know each other from the hallowed halls of the New Zealand Broadcasting School.
Yes.
And that's where I think you kind of got into imaging kind of early. You've got a company called Wizz FX, which is one of the best imaging companies in the world. You service clients all over the world, don't you?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, so we originally started with clients in New Zealand, being an expat, and has grown to we've worked with stations in faraway places as Iceland, but now yes, a lot of American stations, quite a few European stations, quite a few British stations, English stations, BBC and stuff like that. So yeah, we're in amongst it with some of the very big companies. So we're quite a small company, but hopefully punching above our weight.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely. So imaging, what is it? Because most people won't really think about imaging. What do you mean? Is that something to do with cameras?
Yeah, well, I mean, this is the age-old issue, I think, with all people who work in imaging. I still can't really explain this to my mum. And I've only been doing it for 20-odd years. So, yeah, I mean, imaging is like the bits, I think, on a radio station that create the brand. And I think the word imaging is, it's not the right term, really. But that's kind of what has been used, because when you watch a TV station and you see the little identifiers in between, either between ads or maybe even just at the end of an ad break before the next TV show starts or whatever, it'll have the logo, won't it? And it'll say a little bit about what's coming up, or maybe it's a competition or it's promoting another show. So it's those kind of elements, but in a radio sense, obviously with just audio. And it's I think a lot of people that do radio imaging prefer internally to call it audio branding, because really that's what it is. But yes, certainly I know that the traditional name is what has stuck. But it's just sonic identities. I'm using all these other words to describe it that it probably also need to be unpacked a bit. But yeah, it's the voice of the station.
Everything that's not like music, ads, or talking falls into kind of imaging, basically, doesn't it? Yeah. Excellent.
And collectively, I think on a lot of radio stations, rightly or wrongly, let's not unpack that. Let's not get into that debate. But rightly or wrongly, it's often the thing that, other than music, it's the thing that takes up the most amount of time on the station. And commercials, if it has commercials, you're looking at this as the radio imaging is the thing that talks to the listener the most. So it's incredibly important.
And why do stations use it if it's incredibly important? Do you know?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, why do they go down that route and not just have the DJs and the music?
Yeah, I think that's that is a great question. I think there are opportunities for the presenter to say certain things, but it's also an opportunity to do and say things that you might not want your presenter to say. That could be a commercial message, or it could be that you don't want the presenter to spend all their time talking about what's coming up, and what other things are happening on the radio station. So that's where you could use radio imaging perhaps to serve that function. But also, traditionally, when we all had, and I'm old enough to remember pre-digital radios in cars, you had the dial and you would just be going around trying to you just see that little analog dial move along. You might not necessarily know that you're on 92.7, it'll just be on sort of 92 and you don't know how far up or down. And so it was quite important, I think, in those days to say the name of the radio station and the frequency that you were on, and perhaps communicate what sort of music you were playing between every song so that people knew what was going on. Now, perhaps that's less needed in the modern era, but a lot of radio stations still use these junctions between songs or before or after commercial breaks, or in the flow of, even sometimes in the flow of music or around a presenter talking, to get away some key messaging, which will often be station name, and do that in creative ways, right? It's not just, I'm sure we'll get to this later on, but it's not just the station name. There'll be some creativity that goes into that musically or technically, whatever.
Arguably, I guess it could be more important these days because it's a much more crowded marketplace than it was back in the day.
Yeah.
And so to differentiate yourself.
I think also you're up against, and again, I guess this is why I think a lot of people, at least not externally but internally, are talking about audio branding or sonic branding over radio imaging as sort of a name for it now, because you're not just competing with the radio station on the other frequency. You're competing with Spotify, you're competing with podcasting and YouTube and all other forms of media. And because everything is so fragmented and so niche, I think you're right. It's very important to still communicate what it is that you do and who you are, so that people who are listening, might have just dropped in for a moment, aren't confused.
And I think, as you said, with podcasting, I think that's going to play, and I see it playing more of a big role in professional podcasts. Like you'll listen to like Freakonomics Radio or, I don't know, This American Life, and they have their own distinct sounds these days, and like they have the same musical beats at different points. So it's like you're kind of in their zone when you're listening to it, which differentiates
Correct.
it. Makes you a better customer of that podcast, doesn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's an example I think everybody brings up. But you imagine, you think of that McDonald's jingle, that da 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 da. Now I remember when they rewrote that and it came out and it was a full song, and Justin Timberlake sang it. Had a hand in that with the creative agency. But even now, I think that was probably about 20 years ago. They just use the whistles or the ba da ba ba ba. Sometimes just notes, whatever it is. Everyone knows that that's McDonald's, right?
Yeah.
And I guess that shows the power of audio branding, generally speaking. Now, radio doesn't work in quite the same way. However, there are elements that are the same. And so sometimes you don't need to hear anything other than a sound effect, or a voice might not even say, BBC Radio 1 is a great example here in the UK. They have a lot of different voices, but you just need to hear them say one. You don't need to hear anything else to know that it's BBC Radio 1. And I think that there's power in that. You start to be able to get away with less. Less is more. And that's the real beauty of well executed radio imaging. And so it certainly follows that same pattern. And so it is, as you say, important because it just brings people into a world. And you're sort of creating clubs, I suppose, and familiarity, and all of those kind of things that I think are really important. And because you've brought up Freakonomics, and you know that they do these things in the specific way, and same tones and beats and whatever else in same places, it's instantly recognizable to you. You recall it. And I think that's a repetition thing that also plays in amongst making good stuff.
Yeah.
And I think that you're right. That is very important in radio, because you are wanting to create this community with what you're doing. And it is also, there's an air of professionalism to that, I think. That I think, if it was more haphazard, if only one product is very haphazard, that's fine. You understand that product is a haphazard product and that's its brand. But if anyone else is haphazard as well, you start to get confused. So I think that's why a lot of people are quite laser focused on a journey and a sound, and having it have this home and this community.
Cool. Before we go any further, I'll play some of your work so that people can start to listen out for what we're talking about. And nice new website, by the way. Just
thank you.
Compliment you on that. It's brand new.
Thank you.
So we're hearing brand new stuff from Chris's website, wizzfx.com. This is the CHR showreel off the front page.
Wizz FX, custom imaging, CHR.
This is what we do.
Your station could sound like this.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. Yeah, soulful. Charlie XCX selects the best song ever. Yeah, crazy. Charlie XCX selects the ultimate playlist to soundtrack the big moments in your life on BBC Sounds.
Give me that, give me that.
1, 2, 3, 4. FM.
Check it live. You got it going on.
99.9.
LA, Vegas, Chicago.
Cool. It's a nice compilation. You can hear the full thing on the front of the station. Now, I'm going to play a country one as well, just to show a bit of difference between the two.
Wizz FX, custom imaging, country. Your station could sound like this.
98.7 KMGO. Iowa's #1 for new country.
If I didn't love you, I'd be good by now. I'd be better than barely getting by somehow. Yeah, whiskey and rain coming down.
Cool. Hard cut out of that one. Some great work there. It always sound like imaging has got its own kind of sound itself in a way. Like it sounds like exciting and sizzly and like it's been compressed to the wazoo. Do you want to talk us through why it's come to that sound? Like, is there a competition for eardrums like on the waves, and you're trying to win it at all costs?
I think that's definitely a perception, yes, and I think that's a there's in technical, music and advertising and in podcasts and even videos on YouTube and stuff, there's this thing about the loudness war that's been going on for a long time. And there are various measures, without delving too far into it, that govern what's allowed.
Yeah, if people want to like go down a rabbit hole with that, just search like the loudness wars on YouTube, and you'll find so much info about like how compression has just changed the face of music and radio and lots of different things. But yeah, I digress.
And also a lot about our listening habits and what it does psychologically to people. And yeah, so there's certainly a lot of guff on that, and you could lose yourself, as you say, it's a rabbit hole. But I think in radio there are no rules and regulations yet that govern how loud you can be. And because of that, unfortunately, there can be a tendency to play into, well, I need to make things as loud as possible. I need to compete with what's going on. But I think interestingly, yes, the stuff that we played is quite compressed, but actually if you were to pull up the an LUFS meter, again, try not to get too technical, it's actually still fairly dynamic in comparison to other things that are happening. Yes, imaging certainly has this loud sound, and it's meant to sound exciting
and kind of edgy. It's got like an edge to it, I was
always taught very early on, many moons ago, when we knew each other as young men, that the idea really is to create excitement and to be bigger and more edgy than the brand itself. So you use some of these technical tools, compression and whatnot, to make it sound a bit more exciting and sexy, I guess. Yeah, and you want it to leap out of the radio, because if someone has the radio, it's something that was told to me by an old boss of mine when I was working in New Zealand, Christian Boston. He said to me, if someone's got the radio down quite quietly, you want the imaging to really kind of jump out just that little bit louder, so people go, oh, something's happening, and turn it up. And so I guess I've just applied that mentality. But I think also there's this degree of you don't want to listen to, by all means, go and dissect and listen to the many minutes of reels that we have on the website, but it's not built to be listened to in that way, is it? It's meant to sit between songs and bring that energy.
I find it quite fatiguing to listen like on good monitors or headphones, as it should, because it's like mainlining, caster sugar. Like it's just too much. But little bits are nice between songs and everything. So I take my hat off to you working with it all day as well. There must be some like silence breaks that are needed where you just sort of go into a quiet room and just rock backwards and forwards a little bit.
There's a lot of it's become the Matrix. There's a lot of I can make this thing without listening to it.
Right.
And then I've made it, and now I'll listen to it.
True.
And,
Yeah. That's interesting.
I know where to put certain things, and then I can just listen for the end.
Yeah, I mean, I do the same thing with my voice stuff. How I can edit it without looking at it. You get very good visually.
You know what
with
a breath looks like. You know what a
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. I know I did that take 3 times, and I can take them out. Yeah, etc. So speaking of voice, you need voices in imaging generally. Is there a voice-free imaging? Probably not, because it needs to communicate some kind of language, doesn't it, to get into the listener?
Yeah. I think that just to step back to that McDonald's idea, there are stations that do have like a sonic logo or a jingle package that they've had for years, decades maybe, and so they can get away with just whatever their logo is just played with a few notes. That does exist, but I think a majority of radio stations have followed fashion too much and perhaps have changed too many times to have that in their back pocket. So
as the victim of as the voice that's being cut from voicing a major network, I know what it feels like, changing every 2 or 3 years.
But I think it is imperative for most stations, and to go back to that example I quoted before about BBC with Radio 1, they can just say 1 now, and people know, okay, it's Radio 1. Cool. That's not to say they don't. I mean, they do still say, you'll get usually BBC Radio 1, or it might be 1, BBC Radio 1, or whatever. You get some sort of combination of it, but they can get away with less when they want to. But it still needs a voice, right? So yeah, you're right. It is important, and you do need one or more.
It used to be in the day that like you did have like a voice that was the sound of something. Like I'm thinking of like John Sweetman in New Zealand here as the voice of like classic hits or something. Just for like an institution, you just hear his voice and be like, oh, it's a classic hits guy. Have you seen a move away from that where it is more of a potpourri of either on-station or off-station voices, and are they changing quite regularly, or are they still sticking with that kind of consistent sound?
I think it really depends on the brand. And I think that a station like when I was in New Zealand at ZM, I think we changed the voice once or twice, and I was there for 6 or 7 years. We had a consistent voice, but we added or removed other voices from that. Similarly, when I was at Capital here in the UK, we had one voice, a guy called Howard Ritchie, who just was power, massive power. And he'd been on the station for so long that it's almost like if you take him away, you're taking away the identity of the station. So we would add in other voices around him as a sort of supporting team, and we would change them occasionally. But then you look at a station like Radio 1 or Kiss FM UK, and they have there's a multitude of voices going on there. And it's more about those stations are reflecting younger audiences, much younger audiences than perhaps something like Capital, although I don't think that those at Capital would like to hear that. I think they would say they're aiming for the same audience. But I think that younger folk don't necessarily care about one person talking at them all the time or talking with them all the time. They have, they've got lots of friends, so they're used to hearing lots of voices. Whereas a station that is more of a classic hits format or an easy listening format might have one or two very solid, consistent voices that just are there over time and become a warm friend because that brand's music is, and that its personality or stationality is an old word that I remember from my broadcasting school days, which is the personality of the radio station is such that you want that. So you keep, so a lot of the choices feed into that wider idea of who is the radio station. And by that, I mean, if you had to boil your radio station or your brand down to one being one person, who is that person and what do they like? And then you'd reflect that by your choice in voices or voice or what have you.
And I guess, so the gender and age of the person is going to be, dictated by their sort of, it's going to be a peer of the target audience, effectively, isn't it?
Yeah, correct.
Yeah.
I would
absolutely.
say that one thing I will say is you might be, like my, she'd probably kill me if she was in the house, and she's not, so I can say it. My wife is a voiceover artist, and she's in her mid-40s, yet she's voicing for a station that's much younger. So I think that it also comes down to the tone. You might be old, you might be young, but you might have a voice that is either before or beyond your years, and therefore suits.
Totally.
And
Playing
I think
a character.
The beauty of that, yeah, correct. Yeah, and I think the beauty of that is with bigger scripts, and in radio imaging, I know we'll get onto this in a bit. With radio imaging being what it is, sometimes you have one word to say, sometimes you will have 30 words or more to say in something slightly more long form, but a lot of the personality will come out in the long form stuff, and so you're able to develop that character, as you say, and that spills into other things, and you learn how to say one in a youthful way, or
exactly,
or in an old way, whatever you like.
Yeah.
And I guess that's the knack, isn't it? Ultimately, at the end of the day, is learning how to be able to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. So what's the usual process for casting voices for imaging? Is it something that you do as the production company, or does the station cast?
It can be a mix of both. We have been contacted by some people we've worked with who have just gone, we're looking for new voices as part of what we're doing. Who would you suggest? Which is great. The problem can sometimes be that our clients have a traditional way that they've worked in the past for selecting voices. So that can make it difficult because they're expecting to hear the same 5 people that are always used or whatever. But sometimes they'll have already cast voices, and so we won't have a choice. Again, tends to fall into the same sort of roster of people that you would usually hear. When we have the opportunity to go a little bit more, not off-piste, but certainly we have more control over, what the sound is going to be. We've been given slightly more rein. We'll look for voices anywhere and everywhere. I think long gone are the days where you had to be a dedicated specialist at radio imaging. I mean, there is a knack to it, but it's coachable, and it is sometimes nice to work with fresh voices who don't necessarily fit the traditional imaging mold, because you are either able to catch the mistakes early, or the tropes or the cliche styles of imaging voicing early, and kind of work to move a voice away from them, or it's just fresh. Like I sometimes find we just did a podcast branding package actually for a football club here in the UK, and it was the client had written a really great script, and them being people in the radio industry as well, that they sort of have a good command of how to write a good script. So it was excellent to work with, but also they'd selected a voice that was perfect, and it just all came together. It was one of those moments where I don't know if we'd have done a better job of selecting. It was it just sounded so good. And, but that voice I had never worked with, never heard of before. And it's so refreshing. And I'm not so sure that this person had done a lot of traditional radio imaging before too. But we didn't direct the session, unfortunately. But they delivered some really excellent stuff that was just a little bit more, not informal, but it wasn't stagnant. It wasn't cliche. It just had this lovely sort of natural feel to it, and it worked brilliantly. And I mean, now the voiceover style was meant to be very over the top English movie trailer voiceover. So even when you're taking the mickey out of that sort of voiceover style, I mean, you instantly fall into a pattern. It works, but it was just really fresh and nice. And I think there is certainly a desire from us as a company, and I know from some of the other companies in our space, to work with fresh talent and not work with the same 4 or 5 people. So I think I have put out casting calls before, and unfortunately we've not been able to go as far as we'd like on those casting calls. But you find some really excellent people when you're doing that, and hopefully you can work with them on another job that comes forward. But I think regardless of someone's experience, I think there are people out there that are looking for new voices that are not the same. And the problem is, once you get yourself an imaging gig and you become established, everyone wants you, which is great for the person that's got that gig. But it can be difficult for other people to find a leg in and get started in doing some of the stuff.
Exactly, yeah. I imagine you would have seen like some trend in the industry towards sort of inclusivity and diversity as well, because that's been definitely a trend, you know, in the American market especially, and other markets for advertising. And also like a lean towards that more, like you said, the more kind of relaxed style, like not sound like most of the casting calls come through today saying don't sound like a traditional voiceover. We don't want like an announcer read. It's got to, you know, sound casual and conversational, etc. And would you say that applies to imaging?
I do think that, yes. I think people don't speak in the way that sometimes the audio we hear, especially in radio imaging, even some of the stuff that we're making now, which I think is quite modern and fresh, people don't necessarily speak in that way. But I think there is a big angle and push towards being more natural, speaking even more like the audience. And you go back to the 50s in New Zealand, for example, and the voices were almost British when you would listen to some of these archival broadcasting, but that's not how we sound. We have this, depending on who you're talking to, a lovely or horrible accent. But that's what we should be hearing, right? Like we should be hearing our own voices in media. And I think there's one thing I will say about the UK, which I really love, is I can turn on any radio station and I will hear a plethora of accents, you know, from all across the country, all within one commercial break or on one radio station's piece of imaging. And that's great. And definitely, as you say, inclusivity has increased massively. You hear all sorts of different tones and styles, and that's great, and as it should be, because that's what life is like. When I walk out my door, I'm going to talk to people just like that. So you know, I think it makes radio more friendly, but also just generally media and brands more friendly because they are more like real people.
Yeah, totally. So. Say someone gets this gig. Oh, and I was going to also say, is it important that people have like an imaging demo, or would you just cast them from like a commercial, or just from the reels on their sites?
I'd be happy to cast irrespective of hearing imaging, because I have an imagination. I can hear someone's voice and go, cool, this person, regardless of whether there's coaching involved, you know, for example, 3 years ago when we were launching our Construct product, which is like a production service thing for radio stations, we were looking for a voice for our hip hop brand or format. And all of the hip hop voices that I were hearing were big sort of traditional American voices. They didn't sound like their audience. They didn't sound particularly fun and friendly, albeit we're wanting a voice with a bit of attitude, because, you know, hip hop can be certainly quite an aggressive musical format at times. But we ended up finding a guy in South Dakota, of all places, who was a friend of one of the guys that I work with, he's a hip hop musician. That's what he does. He's just a rapper. And we're just like, cool, well, can you read some stuff? Let's have a listen to it. And it was, his tone was great. We had to do a little bit of coaching and working to kind of get it like perfect and how we wanted it. But he just had a sound to his voice that we just couldn't find anywhere else, that we got excited about. And I think that, you know, I definitely will listen to demos irrespective of imaging being in there, and just, is there a cool tone here? Can I hear that this would work? Do I have a feeling about it? And I think that that's how a lot of casting works generally anyway. You know, they're looking for a specific thing, but if they have three voices that sound like that specific, whatever the specific sound they're after, if they have three voices that meet the criteria, they're going to go on a feeling. I feel like this one's better or whatever. It isn't unhelpful to have an imaging demo, though, because I think there are plenty of people in this industry that unfortunately don't have imaginations, and they want someone they know has already done it before, so it makes their life a lot easier to just go, here's the script, read it, done. Unfortunately. And I know there are people out there that will do imaging demos for people. We have done it before for a few voices. But I'm not sure that's the right way to go about it. And I know you enter into a chicken and egg scenario where you want an imaging demo, but you don't want to have a fake one.
How do you get the work to get the work?
Yeah, and it's tough.
Yeah,
it is tough. But I think that's it comes down to relationship building, like anything, doesn't it?
It does. Yeah.
I can think of a few people I've worked with in the past. Who haven't done imaging before, but we've just been chatting, and then suddenly, do you know what? I've got something that will be perfect for your voice. Let's do it, and that leads to another thing, and another thing, and a couple of years down the road, they've done quite a lot of stuff, and bam, there's an imaging demo.
Yeah. It's a long game,
and I think, it is a long game. Yeah. So, but equally, I know of people that have just gone out and got an imaging demo made and have walked straight into work. So it's a really tough one. I hate to advise people either way because, but my personal feeling is, that I don't need to hear an imaging demo to know if it's a voice that I want to work with.
So say people get that gig, what kind of things happen? What would people expect in a session? Because I'm always surprised. I mean, I've done a few, like especially when you're imaging something from the ground up, there's a lot of stuff to record because you're recording every permutation, pages and pages, and not just that, but like many versions of the same word. The station, you gotta find a lot of new ways and different ways to say things in case they need it. So, talk us through what goes on in an imaging session.
Sure. Yeah. So you'll have, assuming you've got pages of stuff, it's going to be long. It could be an hour or more of saying very few words, but lots of times. And it's very much all bullet point in my mind. Is when when I'm writing a script of imaging stuff, there are specific phrases and sayings that need to be said, and they're constructed in specific ways. So, for example, you'll have the station name. I don't know. Let's say the station's called Yellow. I'm looking at yellow behind me. Yellow. So you're going to have to say yellow 5 or 6 times. And even then you might not have said it right. And you've just got to keep saying it until the producer's like, yeah, that's it. There's a good one there. Say it more like, draw the O out a bit, yellow, or shorten it up, yellow, whatever it might be. And there'll be that coaching and direction. And the tape will just roll the whole way through. The amount of times I've done sessions where I've had someone say the station name 50 times and ended up picking the first one, but you've had to sort of work through a journey to discover what's possible with the voice as well, because it's an instrument really. But then, from that, once you've said the station name once, then, you've got that one in the bag, you've done your 50 takes and there's one in there that's perfect. You might then have to say, this is yellow. And so you go through that process again on yellow. And once you've kind of got the permutations of yellow said, then you're looking at with who? With Toby, with Chris, with lights, with whatever it is. So then you've got to think about, okay, so now I'm saying new words, but they need to work with old words that I've already said. So yellow. With Toby. So you have to think, okay, with Toby, how many different ways can I say that? But when it's clipped out of that session and put after the station name, will it work? Because you're effectively creating building blocks as opposed to saying it out loud, the whole way through every time. And actually, in reality, those 50 yellows, maybe there's 50 this is yellow and 50 on yellows, maybe 2 or 3 are selected and will be I tend to cut out of sessions my favorite bits and save them separately in a sort of a database, and then I'm able to construct what I want to say with that voice rather than having to get that voice in every 5 minutes to say specific phrases. So it becomes a almost like a toolkit, a database of that voice to use. But I will say that I have been in every job I've had, even though I might have the perfect take of Yellow with Toby, if I've got a script that has something that comes after the with Toby, like on Saturday nights at 7, I'll still get the voice to say Yellow with Toby on Saturday nights from 7. And if they do a great take, I'll use that take. But if not, then I know I can go back and cut my favorite bits in and create the perfect read. And I think that is the reason that the industry has gone, it sits in that way. And the reason imaging works in that way is because radio is an extremely last minute medium. So, I'm going to probably find out today that on Friday, a client needed something. But the client, it's not because we didn't deliver it. It's because the client's gone, shit, I haven't requested that thing that I needed on Friday and I needed it yesterday. Can I have it now? And we're not going to have time to contact the voice, get them to record. We're going to just have to make it. So I think that there's that sort of sense of immediacy in radio that we can turn things around quickly. That means that the sort of industry has gone to that way where you create almost a database. And I would say on that, or I don't know if we want to go too far into this, but I would say on that what you would tend to do with imaging is either do a buyout for a slightly higher rate, or you would do a license. You would license your voice for a period of time,
right?
Depending on the market and the size of the station and et cetera, because if it's a small internet station, good luck. If it's like a larger station that's broadcasting to millions of people, you'll be able to get a license.
Right.
So certainly,
and
it depends.
How do they differ? So a license is basically a yearly fee. As long as my voice is the voice of your station in any way, then
while you're
paying.
Using me, you must pay X.
Yeah.
And that could be that. And it may be that the agreement is something like, and we have a few like this, where it's like there's a monthly fee. You can have a page read every month if you want, but if not, doesn't matter. Use it or lose it. But if at the end of 12 months you don't want to renew, you have to take my voice off the radio station. So there are scenarios like that. But equally, and as my wife was trying to get into it, and I know lots of voices do that, there's been smaller little stations or one-off jobs where it's there's just a fee for this thing, and it will cost you whatever the price is for this page, and that will be it.
Exactly. I mean, then that's kind of fair enough if it's like you say, an internet station with like 500 monthly users. Like it's
totally.
It's such small fry that it's like it's not. There's no economic model that works paying the voice slots.
That's right.
So,
That's right.
You were going back to saying about making stuff out of work parts. AI voice is a recent addition to the world. And have you heard of? Have you heard of any production departments or anything using those tools to sort of get things they otherwise, they need the voice to voice them, they're not available, so let's just make it with this AI model?
I've not, and we haven't done it. I think there are two problems there. I think the first problem is, will the quality be right? And the second problem, which is arguably more important, is what's the legality around that? Like, I can record a session with you. We forget a word.
It happens.
Can I just, totally. I'll just upload the session and model it and I'll say it myself and bam, it's done. But I think, that's poor form if people are doing that, because I think most voices would go, no problem, I'll just say that one thing. It's not a big deal. If it's lots of stuff, pay for the session. Sorry, you forgot a bunch of stuff. But I sort of also, I think it's such it's a tricky place to be. And, my opinion on AI is that, it's scary for a lot of people, us included. We could all find that we are out of work. However, I think the people that know how to leverage and use the technology in a smart and creative way will be successful. So we do use a lot of AI tools, but we don't use AI tools for replacing the performances of real people. And
you use it for creating new effects. And
correct.
Yeah.
And one thing I will say, the one thing we have done with it is we had a job come in for a station and needed it to sound like a 90s house record with a preacher. And we're finding it really difficult to kind of find the voice and to get the sound, and also we didn't have the budget for it. So we used an AI tool to create this preacher man sort of not American,
basically
Chicago.
like a sample. Like you wanted a custom.
So we've effectively created our own sample using, but there was a performance involved in that. Ultimately, I performed it, but the performance was key. And if someone could have performed it better, then we'd have got that person to perform it, whatever. So it becomes, as you say, it's an effect. Using it for an effect rather than replacing an entire industry or an entire person, because in that particular piece, we still had the station voiceover doing the station voiceover bit. So I think, there's a lot of legal ramifications for replacing voiceovers and using this technology. And I do think ultimately, although it can be very convincing looking at some of the scams that are out there using AI technology, I think people want to be interacting with other people. And when you listen to a radio station or you are on hold on phone, dealing with an automated thing, it's a robot. You want it to be a person, or at least sound so convincing that it's a person. And so I think that AI is not there. It doesn't replace people and human interaction, human connection. So I think that there'll still be a big need for it. And I'm not aware of anyone using AI tools to replace voices in our space, or even in like just generally the creative industries space. I have heard of it happening in Australia. Like
interesting. Andrew Peters, who's the one of the hosts of the Pro Audio Suite, they did an episode about how he was the voice of a major network, and they said we've got this digital voice now that's not a person, so we don't need you anymore, which is fairly blunt and brutal. But they might have a backlash. Who knows? Like it's people who've got good voices and know how to intuit things are hired for that reason. So maybe there's an X factor that they don't realize they'll lose until it's gone. Who knows? I wonder if you think about some singers and musicians who release sample packs, right? So if they're a singer, obviously it's samples of them singing things, or a great guitarist might release a sample pack of their style of playing guitar. And I see AI as perhaps being a tool in a voiceover's sort of skill set of, sure, here's my voice modeled by AI that you can license directly from me and use. But if you want the premium service, you'll get me to do a session every. I feel like that's the model that's evolving, and that is happening as we speak. Like there are voice models out there. It's like OnlyFans for voiceovers, isn't it? It's like you pay a subscription fee to use my. Exactly. Yeah, I'll say whatever you want. Of my AI voice, get me to say whatever you want. But I think that's in all seriousness, I think that is probably where we will all end up. Even people who produce things for radio stations, it will be, okay, there'll be tools that I can use to create. It will make me more productive, but it won't necessarily replace me. Now, I know that voiceovers will feel that they can be replaced, and I totally get that. That could be the case. It could be. But if you are able to utilize that as a stream of income, then I think people will probably come to Toby for Toby's AI voice. Yeah, exactly. Hopefully. We can only hope. Should we dive into like showing people what an imaging session kind of sounds like in terms of giving different options for different lines, and that kind of imaging sound? Like I said, I've been the imaging voice for a few stations, and it is kind of a certain place that you have to put your voice. At least for the traditional imaging sound that we've been talking about, the kind of balls to the wall, exciting thing. And there's also the thing, and this is kind of geeking out a bit, but there are some voices or certain approaches to voices which compress really well, and others that kind of don't. And I've never quite been able to crystallize why that is for some voices. They compress really well. It's all about dynamic range in the delivery. If a voice has a very dynamic delivery,
it can be difficult to. It's not impossible
to control with the compressing. Yeah,
yeah,
right.
sure. Your
yeah.
CPU doesn't like you because you're loading up 500 instances of plugins to kind of flatten it out.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
some voices just have this, rounded delivery that is consistent. Makes it a lot easier to make them seem bold and interesting and exciting.
Self-compression, I've heard it, where you can kind of use
Yeah.
your voice to like by using the muscles in your voice, you can kind of push the voice, and make it like quite flat, like it's had a first layer of compression
As long
already.
as you don't sound like you're spewing, hey.
Exactly.
And then I'm almost over. Yeah.
Exactly. Oh well, hopefully we can get close to that in this without me actually spewing everywhere. And we've got a demo script here. I'm just going to put it on screen there. Hopefully you can see that. And yeah, I'm just going to hoon into it. What genre should we start off with? Should we say it's
Well, why don't we start with the genre that this is,
That
which
actually
is
is.
sort of, it's like an easy listening station. We're talking sort of a female skew, probably sort of mid-30s to early 50s sort of thing.
nice?
Okay.
Nice.
So warm,
Yeah.
inviting, but not. I don't think it needs to be big smiles. I think it needs to be a hint of friendliness to the delivery. But again, I like to say, do a big smile when you're saying things, but don't necessarily try to like I'm smiling while I'm talking to you, and I think that comes through in the sound of my voice. But I'm not necessarily going so far as to laugh after everything that I'm saying and make it sound cheesy.
Yeah.
So it's just trying to reflect that warmth and energy while being happy.
Cool. Okay. Nice. I'm going to do the first 4 lines, and I'll give you like an ABC on each of them, eh? That
Perfect.
usually works quite well in sessions. All right. Here's work parts. Bay easy. Bay easy. Bay easy. On bay easy. On bay easy. On bay easy. This is bay easy. This is bay easy. This is bay easy. Good times sounds like this. Good times sound like this. Good times sound like this.
Yeah, so my instant thought is, as we're sort of getting towards the end of that, you started to get a little bit more, actually quite like the slightly more intimate sound. But I wonder if it's almost too much enunciation, like bay easy. Whereas I think it could be bay easy, almost like one word.
Yeah, right. And casualize it a
And
little bit.
similarly, on Bay Easy and the this is Bay Easy, I think the Bay Easy wants to be a little bit more linked. But
yeah.
I'm okay with the joining words not being. But I think with good times sound like this, again, let it roll through. Don't worry so much about that diction between the times and the sound.
Yeah, sure. So like read through the grammar a little bit. Cool.
Yeah.
All right. Let's give it another shot. Bay easy. Bay easy. Bay easy. On bay easy. On bay easy. On bay easy. This is bay easy. This is bay easy. This is bay easy. Good times sounds like this. Good times sound like this. Good times sound like this. Good times sound like this. I hate when you do a take and you realize that you've gone against the direction you were just given.
Yeah. No, do you know what though?
Yes.
That for me is much nicer. All I would want to do in a traditional session would be like bang on the tone, loving the warmth and stuff, but would just love a slower option. And it's difficult because you don't want to break it up too much, but just simply bring the pace down a bit.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Say everything slower. So instead of like,
Yeah, slower but not disjointed.
not like this is bay easy.
Yeah.
Slowing the whole thing down. This is bay easy. Like, yeah.
Yeah, you got it. Yeah,
Yeah.
you're looking to not break it up, but still, yeah.
Cool. If we were doing a more like a format more like BBC Radio 1 or one of those edgier formats,
Sure.
and let's go to one of these like the Weekend Jam or the Request Show. I'll do a couple of those which are in that
Yeah, that
more
sounds
that
fun.
style. and try and sort of conjure that energy and throw more energy at the mic and see what happens.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be brighter, isn't it? It's going to be you don't necessarily need to smile quite as much because you want to be a bit cool, but you don't want to be unfriendly. So it's that I'm smiling way too much for it. You just want it to be a sort of it's sort of a half side smile rather than a full. I'm really happy about what I'm saying.
Yeah, cool. All right, we'll give it a go and get your feedback afterwards. The request show. The request show. The request show. Weekends. 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 The weekend. The weekend. The weekend. The weekend jam. The weekend jam. The weekend jam. Clipping a bit there. Apologies, listeners.
So I think you can go two directions with this. And I think you could either go, depending on the style of the youth brand, you could either go like more up. So from where you've gone, slightly more up and a little bit more energetic, or you can come down and be, I'm even cooler and don't care.
Yeah.
I think let's go up a little bit more and be a little bit more like, I'm pretty excited about this thing. I liked that the diction wasn't absolutely perfect because it's natural. I'd love to hear it slightly more sort of upbeat, not like, again, you're not happy. You're just like, yes, the request show. Like I'm talking to my mates sort of thing.
Yeah. Cool. Awesome. And it was interesting. I just realized that because I could hear myself clipping in my headphones, like I didn't project as much, which affected the performance. And that's something like for talent to note that, like, if you ever hear, like, it's good to like give yourself like 12 dB of headroom so that you can go there if you need to, like in terms of projecting. I just thought I'd mention that while I was in the moment. All right. So we'll take it up a bit and I'm going to turn my gain down a little bit. All right. The request show. The request show. The request show. Weekends. 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 The weekend. The weekend. The weekend. The weekend jam. The weekend jam. The weekend jam.
Yeah. And I mean, and some brands would push even further. I wouldn't. I personally think that that's kind of on the money. And what I like about that is, especially with a lot of these younger brands, you might be chucking in samples of songs and things that the audience is familiar with. I hate pop culture references because we're not talking Family Guy and Simpsons drops, which is an old trope, isn't it?
Yeah,
but
the
you
90s.
know what I mean?
Yeah,
something like that's recognizable to the audience, and then to have the voice stick out with a kind of, this thing's happening, cool. I think that's quite powerful. And if you'd have taken it down and been much more kind of, I really couldn't give a shit.
Yeah. Which is like some of the BBC stuff, you really hear that coming through.
Absolutely. And that works for a format, like a youth format, but it can also work quite nicely for a rock format. But again, it will vary. There's a station here in the UK, Absolute Radio, and they have a comedian guy who's like very over the top. Blah, 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 blah. Terrible imitation of his voice and accent, but so again, it really depends on what the personality of the brand is. So although we've done what we've done, that might not suit any of those stations. They may have something else in their mind entirely.
Yeah, and I know
that, like, for example, my first job at ZM, we started leaning more down a comedy angle, and we had like a female voiceover, Georgia, who was quite cool and evoked that sort of
she's got a very cool voice.
It had like this
smoothness.
And it was cool, a bit of attitude. Then we used a guy, Rue, who was he was there to say the snarky stuff, and it deliberately snarky. I'm deliberately saying stuff that's a bit sarcastic. And he had that tone that sounded sarcastic, but we would never direct him to sound cool or upbeat because that wasn't what we were after. So it can whereas at Capital we had three voices and the brief was just sound cool. You just need to sound shit hot all the time. Everything we do, whether we're giving away a car or we're giving away a car mat, it needs to sound like the best thing ever. And that was what we would do. So it can really vary.
It's worth noting as well for talent that might get themselves into a imaging session, even just from doing those 4 lines in quite a hypey, like, and you say, like, I probably would have been produced further at some stations. It's very fatiguing. Like, I wouldn't do that for more than 20 minutes without saying, like, I need a 10-minute break.
Yeah, totally.
So don't
Give us
be
some
afraid
water.
to ask for breaks when you're doing it, because the temptation is to keep pushing it. And at that point, you will be useless in about 40 minutes and lose your
Agreed.
voice for a couple of days. So don't be afraid to ask for breaks.
And I think the only thing we probably didn't touch on there was, I mean, and a seasoned professional like yourself wasn't doing it, but some voices can fall into this pattern.
Patterning,
of,
yeah.
I'm saying a thing. Now I'm saying another thing. Now I'm saying a third thing. Now I'm saying a fourth thing with the same inflection. And that is something to really be aware of, is you want to be mixing. How do you mix the inflections and the tones up while still being in whatever the box is that you're being directed to hit?
Absolutely.
And
cool.
that's hard.
Yeah.
I absolutely warrant that that's a difficult one, and it takes experience. But I also think it takes someone who is directing you to spot it and say, hey, can you just try an inflection that's more like X or Y?
Yeah, exactly. I always try and like visualize it. Like you have like sentences that end up and sentences in the middle and then ones that end down. And like if you actually like, you imagine it as like singing notes going up and down, and it's just a case of coming up with new shapes that you voice. But yeah, it's a very good skill to learn as a voiceover artist. Cool. Well, we are pretty much out of time, but it's been fantastic to chat and get really like surgically precise on this fantastic genre of audio branding. I'm going to call it from now on.
Thank you. Yeah.
It needs a rebrand.
The
I
problem
think.
is you say it to clients, they're like, I want imaging. What's
Yeah.
this? Yeah. Yeah. Audio branding.
Yeah, because I did have a question in there about what's the difference between sound design, audio branding, music production, etc. But I guess they're all variations on a theme.
Yeah, totally. I think probably if you are not from a radio background, music production, sound design, audio branding makes more sense. Sonic identity, all of that makes more sense. If you're from a radio background, it's radio imaging. And we find that depending on what client we're talking to will depend on what language we use.
Yeah, absolutely.
But
Cool.
thank you for having me. It's been very good. I'm glad I could help.
Yeah, no problem at all. If you want to check out more of the work, and I encourage you, if you want to get into this genre, you have to listen to what's out there right now to hear what's expected. And like if you can do it, like that's if you want to make a demo in your own studio, then listen to this stuff. It's hard to put together. I will say that making your own imaging demo almost impossible. That's why there are experts like Chris in this world. And
please make sure if you do make an imaging demo or get an imaging demo made, provide references to the person making it, so that you don't end up with something that doesn't sound like where the fashion is currently.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So you can find Chris's work at Wizz FX, WIZZFX.com. And I encourage you to do so. But it's been wonderful to have you on the podcast. Thank you for coming along.
Thank you very much. No, thank you very much. I enjoyed it.